Hello, welcome to MJR RPG, a podcast for tabletop role-playing game reviews, replays, etc. and so forth. This is part 2 of the replay for my Call of Cthulhu scenario, Branches of Bone. If you haven't listened to part 1, you should probably go do that. Or you can listen to the overview of the scenario, or you can just go ahead and purchase it on DriveThruRPG. This replay is completely full of spoilers. If you're ever thinking of playing the scenario, turn away now. Otherwise, on to Branches of Bone, part 2. Off balance from his own vision, much less the madness spouted by Revna, Sven stumbled away from the others, towards the far wall and its cracked sigil. Likewise disturbed, but instead driven to angry frustration, Njal stomped back up the stairs. No warriors, nothing to fight, only this damned magic. Njal was leaving. Harald stared at his father, frozen in place with his followers, words not their own, in voices not their own, in languages not their own, slipping from unmoving lips. He shook his head and followed Njal. Revna paused before also going up, turning an ear to the ensorcelled Vikings' whispers as something snagged her attention. 4 Vikings, each speaking in a different language. Their own tongue, the tongue of the monks, and 3 others. 3 others. 4 Vikings, 5 voices. She shuddered, shouted to Sven they were going up, then hurried to the stairs. Sven waved her off. He'd never taken to runes, couldn't read them, certainly couldn't write them, but he could tell the brutal scratchings ringing the sigil did not exist in his language. Their harsh angles and savage lines spoke of something primal, something violent. He could almost hear, almost feel its meaning, its rhythm, its steady thumping beat. His brow furrowed. He reached out, setting a palm on the wall, right over the cracked tree at the center of the sigil. The brittle stone vibrated under his palm with a slow and steady beat. Putting his ear to it, he could hear that muffled beat. Disturbed but curious, he spun around a spear and bashed at the wall with its butt. It proved thin, and chunks broke away without much persuasion. When he'd made a hole in the wall the size of his fist, and he had hefty fists, he squinted through, perplexed. Only 2 knuckles in was another wall, one of wood. His squint tightened. He knew wood. He built his own ships, cut the timber himself. The wall's wood was knotted and swirled. No one had worked that wood. It wasn't a wall. It moved in time with the beat, pulsing, throbbing, beating, living. Under a strange compulsion, he pushed his fingers against it. That familiar pressure rushed through his body from his fingertips, up to and squished his brain. Below him, those insufferable little bipedal creatures flung seeds around that stone, the southernmost of the 4. Amongst his roots, pitiful little trees sprouted, but soon they tangled and choked him, stealing his water, and the stone grew fat with their plunder. He cried out as it and the others overwhelmed him with their weight. The wood thumped away under his fingers, his own heartbeat slowing to meet its pulse, and with a horrifying certainty, Sven knew that a heart, a great, vast, terrible organ, beat away on the other side of the living wood. He pulled his hand away, ignoring the stinging pain as if the skin on his fingertips ripped away, like tearing skin from frozen iron. He pointedly ignored the feeling of something bony and rigid poking through that torn flesh, and the horrible itching breaking out all over his body. Sven fled, trying not to realize he understood 2 of the voices flowing from the cursed Vikings. One of which spoke in the exact manner he instinctively knew the writing around the sigil would sound on a human tongue. And he certainly ignored the bark-like knotted and swirling scabs growing with observable speed over the Viking's skin, or the spurs breaking out of their fingers and joints, splitting like branches that twisted in grope for him as he sprinted past. Njal planned to find the pudgy monk and drag him down to the crypt. This all stank of magic, heathen magic. And what were monks if not magicians? Njal snarled at the 3 robed men, huddling together. Damn sorcerous freaks, the lot of them. But just before he snatched one up, he checked himself for 2 reasons. 1, Revna was a Voller, and while Njal couldn't claim to be an expert in religion, magic, or words, he guessed a Voller wasn't much different from a sorcerer, and she was alright by him. The monks may be cowards and southern barbarians, but they seemed just as frightened out of their minds as he would be if he wasn't fearless. The second reason was the racket from down the hall. goats braying and chickens squawking in a maddening chorus, like a wolf had gotten into the pen. Something about their screeches set his teeth on edge. They were muffled, gargling like they were being drowned. The scrawny monk met his eye, said something in a shaky voice, and gestured at the animal shack. Njal hefted his axe and stomped forward. In tune with his man, Harald readied his sword and shield and fell in step with the berserker. Revna, huffing from going up the stairs so soon after her augury, leaned on her staff in the center of the hall and waited. By the time Sven reached the last step, sweat stinging his eyes, Harald and Njal had already crept into the storeroom. Feathers wafted in the air. One squawking hen fluttered up, nearly cresting the partition. Something snagged its leg. With a crack, the chicken snapped down, its rattling screech drowned out as its throat clogged. Njal and Harald looked at each other, nodded. They peered over the partition. Njal grunted. Harald stumbled back, tripping over his own feet, and cursed and prayed in a string of obscenities. The goats and chickens huddled together in a wriggling mass. Not together, in each other. Jammed through one another in crude angles, beaks and necks, horns and talons, wings and heads, sticking out and wrapped around, all held together with woody blotches and tendrils. Two gibbering goat heads rounded on Njal, still frozen in place by the hideous sight, and the thing tried to get to its many feet. Clearly not yet comfortable in its growing form, the amalgamation struggled and flopped about, giving Njal time to snap out of his funk and with a roar bash his way into the paddock and swing his axe. The mighty chop lopped off a slab of flesh and barky growth, taking a goat head with it. Little blood flowed, but a thick, sickly sweet yellow liquid splattered the walls and Njal. Braying in pain, though Njal's sword actually laughed, the abomination gained a semblance of balance, and two tendrils slithered towards Njal. One tendril met his axe, spinning off to squirm and die in the corner of the room, but the other seized his ankle, drawing him in towards the wriggling mass. Spurs jabbed into his skin, and something within his flesh answered, reaching out to break free of his own body. Harald pushed up to his feet, and down his fear. With a war cry, he bounded into the pen, driving a sword into the beast. The blade clanged uselessly off a hard bit of bark, and the freakish eyes of the goat turned on Harald. He gave a wet scream, gnashing its flat teeth. Then the head whirled through the air, spurting yellow gunk over Harald and Njal. His axe tore through the mass of the amalgamation, ripping it apart. It crumbled into pulsing chunks, and those too soon died. The sweet goop sank into their skin. Their minds jolted again out of their human confines. Harald watched crowds of men and women bearing swords billowing smoke, slashing into his roots, his trunks, trying to find his heart. He ripped and tore them apart, but the scars remained, and he would always know how close they'd come to poisoning him from the inside out. Njal remembered dreaming. The stones held him in a deep slumber for eons, but he still dreamed. The people who had snared him into sleep gave him away to others. They planted trees around him and worshipped him, but they kept him locked away with gifts of spit, ash, seeds, and blood. Others followed, clearing the trees and covering him with a stone temple. He almost awoke then, but legions with smoke and iron hurt him enough to put him back to sleep, and finally others took their place, building a larger stone temple, but they did not feed him as the others had, and so he grew stronger, still asleep, but with enough power to let slip a dream out into the world, where another lost soul found them. And that soul had come, and finally the dream slipped away. It was time to wake up. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this replay, please consider purchasing Branches of Bone from DriveThruRPG. See the show notes for a discount. Thanks to Fuimadane for the generous use of his amazing music. Find links to his YouTube and bandcamp in the show notes. And as always, thank you to CryoChamber for the use of their album Cthulhu. Links again in the show notes. Until next time, have a good one.